Well, I'm excited to have Mary Dunn with us this morning. Mary has over 20 years of sales and management for a Fortune 500 company. During that time, she was responsible for training and developing people in sales, management, and customer service. At the recommendation of friends, she went off and got certified as a coach, as a life coach, and she currently serves as the president of the Austin chapter of the International Coach Federation, and she's on the board of the Central Texas Life Care in San Marcos, and she uses coaching skills to help men and women facing unplanned pregnancies. Her presentation today is born out of a personal experience and passion to help people leave fear behind and fulfill their life purpose. And she has defined her life purpose as point towards truth, share joy, give grace, and glorify God. Amen. I give you Mary Dunn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of my life purpose statement. I needed to hear that this morning because this is a fearful place to be, way up here. So thank you all for coming. And I'll tell you a little, what Craig didn't mention is I've been married for 35 years, and that's fearful for some people. It was for me. And I have 2 children, 2 grown children, and 3 grandchildren. And so, yes, I'm a coach and a speaker, but my favorite moniker is Mimi. And I just love the little people who call me Mimi. So if you're not a grandmother yet or a grandfather yet, can't wait till you get there. If you're like me, I thought those people were obnoxious before I became one. So let me tell you a little bit about my mission today. My mission today is to share with you briefly how we are wired for fear, okay, the science behind fear. Then I'd also like to share some of the types and truths about fear, and then strategies for reviewing our fear through the filter of hope. And I feel like I need to tell you that I had a speech, I wrote a speech, and I did it here many years ago regarding fear. But soon after that, about a year after that, I had a friend say, I'd like you to speak at an organization for breast cancer survivors. And I thought, whoa. And she said, I really like that fear speech, but I need you to include something about hope. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. How am I going to go from fear to hope? And so as I was praying about it, I felt like the Lord gave me an acrostic. And I don't know if y'all like acrostics or not. I love them because it helps me remember, but I've never written one. And sure enough, in church one Sunday when I should have been listening to the sermon, I was making notes in my journal, and there was the acrostic for hope. So that is what I'd like to share with you this morning. So let's get started. Are we? Okay. So first we're going to talk about the wiring for fear. And this is based on Dr. Bill Crawford. He's PhD, with his permission, using his information. If you like this kind of thing, I would suggest you go to his website, Bill Crawford PhD. He has a lot of YouTube videos that talk about fear and how the mind is wired, etc. But very briefly, he divides our brain into 3 sections. The far base of our brain, or the lower section, is the brainstem. The middle section is the limbic system, and together those represent 20% of our brain. The neocortex, or the top of the mind as he calls it, or the upper portion, represents 80% of our brain. The limbic system is what scans all of our senses and all the information we receive through all 5 senses. And our limbic system determines if any of that information is a threat to us. And if it is, it sends it down to the brainstem. And that's where fight or flight is engaged. Okay? So when we're in the lower 20% of our brain, we are not engaging the upper 80%. When we're in the lower 20%, we are not engaging the upper 80%. And the upper 80%, that neocortex, is where empathy, sympathy, reasonable, rational decision-making all takes place. Albert Einstein is famous for a lot of quotes, but one of them that he's famous for is he said that we cannot solve a problem in the same place that it was created. We cannot solve a problem in the same place in which it was created. So when we are down in fight or flight, we cannot solve the problem down there. Let me give you an example. Most of us have either seen something like this or been a party to a conversation like this. Conversation between two people, you can picture yourself or somebody else, and it seems like a very benign conversation, but all of a sudden, frustration or anxiety or something starts to bubble up. The volume in the conversation gets louder. Pretty soon there might be a screaming match and somebody storms off in silence, resentment, or anger. Anybody seen a conversation like that? Been involved in a conversation like that? We have a lady back here this morning. Yeah. So yes, that is an example. Let me give you another one. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody or heard a conversation with somebody where they use very boastful, egocentric language or are very condescending in their speech? Okay? Well, that comes from a place of fear. That person is very insecure and has a fear of being found out to be a fraud or found out that they don't measure up. So what they do is they hide behind bravado or a persona that they've created. Make sense? They're down here and they can't get up here. Well, speaking of hiding out, I happen to research when I'm doing this. I always like to use the Bible as a benchmark. So I went to the Bible to find out where the first mention of fear was. And guess what? Right there in Genesis, at the very beginning of the Bible, it's chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. And it says, "But the Lord God called to the man, 'Where are you?'" This is the Adam and Eve story. Most of us are familiar with it. Eve had eaten the apple, given her husband a bite. They realized, oops, they were naked. They did some kind of fig leaf fashion thing, and then they went and hid. So God comes walking through the garden and says, "Where are you?" Then it says, "And he," Adam, answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." We hide too, like I said, behind bravado and created personas. 365 times in the Bible, "do not fear" or "do not be afraid" is mentioned. 365 times. Now, if you're somebody who believes that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, you're going to also believe that that is no coincidence. If you're not a Bible believer, 365 times, "do not fear, do not be afraid." The point is, he knew we would be. And he knew he didn't want to leave us there. So he created for us a way to leave that spot. So the point of the brain is that we're wired that way and it's not a mistake. So we all have fear. Well, let's talk about the types of fear because those break down. This is used from the late Dr. Susan Jeffers, and if you want to know more about fear, she has an excellent paperback that is called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway." She breaks fear down into 3 sections. Things that just happen. Growing old. We can fight it, but it's going to happen. Losing a loved one or a natural disaster. Things that just happen. The second kind of fear is things that take action. And that's where we're going to sit during this presentation. Decisions, making decisions, take action, things like losing weight or changing a career. These are very fear-based things. The third type is things involving our ego, fear of rejection, fear of failure, or disapproval. So these are the 3 types of fear. Do you recognize yourself in any of these? Every day, we're wired this way. It's not a mistake. Our fight or flight response can save our life. But we have to be able to distinguish what is a life-saving fear and which fears are holding us back from living our best self and creating the future for ourselves that we can live our life purpose on purpose. So, 3 types of fear, 3 truths about fear. This sounds like a downer. Fear will never go away. But as we just reviewed, we are wired that way, and it's good for us. And fear is never going to go away as long as we are stepping out, growing, expanding our capacities, moving into unfamiliar territories. I talked to some of you this morning that are going from being stay-at-home moms back out into the workforce. You may have been there, but 18 years later, 10 years later, this is new territory. Moving from one type of job to another, you're moving into unfamiliar territory. These are scary places to go. So fear will never go away as long as you're moving forward. You are not alone. You saw the picture of the healthy brain. We're all wired that way. Can we say that together? I am not alone. Let's try that together. Yeah, one more time. I am not alone. I am not alone. That's right. We are all there together. And and the third truth about fear is that we create stories. We create our stories to justify our fears. So here's a little something between you're not alone and justifying our story. How many times have we looked at somebody and said, well, they've got it all together, they're well dressed, they're well groomed, everything matches, they're well spoken, they seem to have all the confidence in the world. Clearly, they would be the first person to get a job, and I probably won't get a job or won't get a job that is as good as their job. Right? Because we are creating a story in our head about this person that we're looking at. The truth is, the person that we're looking at has the exact same fears as you do, but they just manifest themselves different. We're comparing ourselves to somebody, and we're looking at their highlight reel and comparing it to our turmoil. How fair is that? It's not. We can't do that. We are each individually gifted and talented in our own way. And you know what? I'm going to go off script for a second and tell you a story about a client that I talked to who had incredible talents, not necessarily ones that she wanted to use in a job, but she had gone to schools and been educated and had all these different talents. And when I commented her on those, and I said, do you talk about those? She said, no, I don't talk about those because those don't count. I said, to who? You have gifts and talents that you don't think may work in the new job that you're going to get. Is that your decision to make? I would say that if you are gifted and talented by God, which you are, we all have unique gifts and talents, that those gifts and talents, the person that you're interviewing with knows about the holes that they have in their organization, and your gift and talent or your hobby or your volunteer work may be exactly the gift that they need or the talent that they need in the job that you're looking for. Don't underplay all the gifts and talents that you have. You can say those things without being braggadocious. So, based on these truths, fear is going to be with us as our constant companion. So, how do we minimize the negative impact that fear, some of us call it stress, by the way, how do we minimize the negative impact of fear or stress on us physically, emotionally, and spiritually? How do we do that? Well, I believe that we review our fears through the filter of hope. And what does that look like? Well, we change the guidelines a little bit. We clear up the picture and we pivot to a new place. And I mean physically pivot to a new place. We have to get into a different mindset. Sometimes I actually have clients, and I do it myself. I move to another spot and say, I'm leaving that spot behind, and I'm going to stand and own this new spot. So let's talk about the filter of hope. The H is the human condition. And again, I happen to use the Bible as a benchmark. And using the Bible as a benchmark, Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All. Capital A-L-L. I was joking with people earlier. I said the Greek word for all is all. We can't escape it. We have all fallen short. And if that was the bookends of our life, we've all fallen short of the glory of God, and we've all fallen short of the glory of God, we'd have a hard time digging ourselves out of that hole. The good news is he doesn't leave us there. He takes us to Jeremiah 29:11. And it says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Hope, by the very definition, is forward thinking, and it's an expectation. It is not a wish. It is forward thinking expectation. The human condition is that we all fall short. We get that. Okay? You do, and so does everybody else. And if we know that and we believe that, then we need to give them grace and give us grace. Forgive others when they don't call back when they say they're going to call back. When they don't make a decision on who they're going to hire next Friday like they say. We don't know what all happens. That's the human condition. Craig mentioned that I was in that I had a career for 20 years. It was in telecommunications. Some of my clients were people like Exxon, Marathon, Chevron. They were big oil companies. And I remember so many times going back to the office and thinking, I would love my job if it weren't for the customers. I had the best job in the world if I did not have to deal with the customers, okay? Because they're human. And we all suffer from the human condition. So, after the human condition, what's our O? Our O is optimism. Okay, now hang on, everybody. I know that there are people out there who just went, oh my gosh, this blonde chick is fixing to go all Pollyanna on us. Well, let's get one thing straight. I'm not blonde. The women in the room went, duh. The men in the room went, seriously? But the truth is that lots of studies and research has been done on optimism. And the benefits, if you doubt me, please go Google optimism and health benefits. There are so many articles and studies on them. I happened to pull one off during this research that was the result and culmination of 83 other scientific studies done the world over. They took these 83 studies, did another study studying the 83 studies. And here are the highlights. According to the latest research, optimistic people are healthier and live longer than pessimists. They measured the impact of optimism on health, and here's what they found. People who are generally more optimistic have more friends. They get depressed less. They make more money. They have happier marriages. They don't give up as easily. They achieve greater success. And by believing in themselves, optimists also take risks and create positive events in their lives. That's about optimism. Just for fun, I Googled the health benefits of pessimism. There was a couple articles. You know how they ended? Well, sometimes pessimists, take a stronger look at reality and prepare. And then they learn that they can become optimists. It always turned around to be optimistic. So we have to get to this place. We have to get to optimism in order to move forward. Okay? Otherwise, we'll just stay in the past. Let me mention one other little thing about optimism. Generally speaking, there are three types of people: energy drainers, energy gainers, and those that are neutral. I'm going to start with energy drainers. Think about somebody in your life that when you talk to them, you walk away and you're almost depressed. As hard as you tried to show them the silver lining, they were bound and determined to hang on to their cloud. And they were taking that dark cloud with them wherever they went. Energy drainers. Do you know somebody like that? Can I see a show of hands? Almost everybody knows somebody. I'm not going to ask you to show me your hand this time, but I do have a question for you. Is that you? Are you an energy drainer? Sometimes. But if it's just sometimes, you're still okay. Are you married to an energy drainer? God bless you. If you are an energy drainer or you're married to an energy drainer, then you need to buy this book. It's on Amazon, and it's called Learned Optimism by Dr. Martin Seligman. I read it years ago because Martin E. Seligman, and it's called, I'll have that for you out here. It's called, his last name is spelled Seligman. Okie doke, Learned Optimism. And I bought the book because I'm closely related to somebody who is a drainer. And I struggled with interfacing with this person. The reality of it is you have to make some pretty tough decisions when you're in a place of vulnerability, which job seekers are. Hanging around energy drainers is not going to do you any good. You need to limit the time that you hang around energy drainers. Typically, they don't know who they are, and they don't know what they're doing to you, but it's not good. It's a negative impact. Neutral folks are just that, neutral. They don't really have an effect on you when you have a conversation with them, positive or negative. And then there's the energy gainers, the people you look forward to talking to, the people who encourage you, the people who listen, really listen, and have a good idea, or say, how can I help you? Those are the energy gainers. And those are the people that we need to surround ourselves with, invest in, and they will invest back in you. But you must be able, the point is you must be able to stand to get to this optimist place in order to do this. Oops, sorry. There we go. You must be in an optimistic place in order to get to the place where you see possibilities. Now, there's another book that I highly recommend. It's called Crucial Conversations, The Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High. One of its authors is Carrie Patterson. And in that book, they talk about possibilities, and they talk about when you are offered two possibilities. It's either this or that. That's called fool's choice. If you believe that there are only two choices, or you are given only two choices, you can stop right there and realize that you have not been resourceful enough and you haven't pushed yourself back away from the emotion or the fear enough to look at other options. There are always more than two options. It can be A and B, A, B, and C, but we don't get to the place of looking at all the possibilities until we're in the place of optimism and believe that all things are possible and believe that there's more than just two choices. And once we're in the place where we have multiple choices in front of us, there is power in feeling like we have control over our choices. And when you're an optimist, as that research study said, you create some of those events in your life. You create some of those possibilities. So, optimism, then possibilities, the power of choice. The E is for engage. This is where action is required. Information is just information until you take action on it. Information does nothing without action. I used this as an example once. I thought, if information was so great, do you think that one more pack of cigarettes would be sold? No, because the information is out there. Cigarette smoking is damaging to your health. People know that. Everybody knows that. But it's just information. Nothing happens until you take action, until you quit, or until you start something. So even what I'm saying today for you all is just information unless you choose to step into it and do something. In the engaged part of the Filter of Hope is a place where there are only two options. You either make a move or you make an excuse. That's where we are on Engage. Tony Robbins had a great quote on Twitter the other day, and I thought that it was an excellent self-check for us. It said, "A real decision is measured by the fact that you have taken a new action." A real decision is measured by the fact that you have taken a new action. If there is no action, you haven't truly decided. So here we are in a place where we need to step into it. So let's review the Filter of Hope. Look at it through the human condition. We're all flawed and failed, but we all have a future. We can move to a place of optimism so that we see a future that has possibilities. The possibilities are always two or more. Always more than two. And we can look at those and then we choose, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to step into? This is going to be hard for you to see. We have the handouts on the back table. But this is an exercise that really takes us and allows us to take a fear or an insecurity that we have and push it through the Filter of Hope and see what comes out the other side. And I'll read them to you, but it says, acknowledge the human condition in my own story. What is the story that you're telling yourself? About why they didn't call you back? About why you don't want to call and follow up? Why you don't believe you're qualified? What's the story that you're telling yourself? And what would that story look like if you put it through the filter of optimism? And what are my three possibilities once I step into that optimistic place? What would I be able to expand on? And how will I choose to engage? What am I willing to do? My one action is. And lastly, it's who will I include for accountability? Take someone with you. Give them permission to ask you about your goal and what you've done to get closer to it. I have a few minutes, so I'm going to tell you, I told them at the beginning, I get tired of hearing my own story, but sometimes my own story is relevant because there's somebody out there who's been there or can relate to it. Anybody who's been in sales? Okay, a few. After graduating from college, I went into sales in this telecommunications company. And as you know, in sales, you have a quota. And if you don't meet your quota, you can get fired. And so I was single, and I was living at home, and my parents were charging me rent to live at home. So I was highly motivated to make my quota. And I had a fear of failure, so I became a workaholic to make sure that I didn't fail. For 8 years, I lived in a place of fear of failure. I was one of 2 women in a large sales organization that was filled with men. So I wanted to fit in. I had a fear of rejection. So that fear of rejection, remember how we said our fears drive our emotion? I thought, well, I have to be friends with them and maybe they can help me. And so, what do I do to to, get in with this group, so to speak? Well, a lot of times we'd go out to a bar after work and have a drink. I don't normally drink, but I did. Pretty soon somebody was smoking. That looked like a cool thing to do and to be one of the guys, so decided to smoke, which is, I still can't believe I did that. I got married during this time. I was in the sales for 8 years, had 2 children. I mentioned that I was a workaholic. There was a time when I was particularly fearful that I wasn't going to make my quota, that I left so early in the morning and came back so late at night. I did not see my children for 5 days, and I lived in the exact same house as they did. Nothing that I'm proud of. It still pains me today. But those behaviors were way outside what my stated value system is, but that's what fear can do to you. When I was living in that mess, I couldn't see it, but I could rationalize it. Our fears, we create stories to justify them. Because I said, well, I need to make this money because I want to be able to send my kids to private school, or I want to, pay off the house, or, we have a car payment. We make up all kind of stories to justify our fear. It wasn't a fun place to be then. It's not a fun place to think about now. But now that I'm out of that mess and looking back on it, I can see that I had a choice. I could have done something different. So all that fear that I just described, 20 years into a career, my husband comes to me and says, we really don't need your income anymore. My husband had done very well. He said, our kids are becoming teenagers. Why don't you consider staying at home, leaving your corporate job and being a stay-at-home mom? Now, for some of you, you might say, oh my gosh, what's the problem? You should have quit on Friday. Well, the problem was that my entire identity was wrapped up in my job. I had a title. I had an income. Now I was a district sales manager. I ran the second largest office in the country, Houston. And stay-at-home moms? Well, I didn't know how to do that. I looked at it and was like, well, where's their productivity? And who does their annual review? I found out later it's your kids who do your annual review. And and what about money? I was a partner in my relationship in my mind. And I had veto authority because I contributed. If I was going to give up $150,000 a year career, then what? I was going to have to ask my husband for money? And how was that going to work? And when I brought that up to him, he goes, well, we'll just put together a budget. Oh my gosh. I was wrenched with fear. I was so afraid of leaving a corporate job that I knew so well to step into being a stay-at-home mom that I knew nothing about. It took me 1 year to make that decision. For the first 6 months, every time we brought it up and every time we talked about it, I ended up in a puddle of tears on the floor because I could not see how I was going to get from here to there. It was a chasm of unknown. Not to mention the fact, what do those women wear when they stay at home? Right? I came up with every excuse, every reasonable, rational question that I could come up with. And finally, I said, okay, I'm going to try it. And let me just tell you, when you're in a state of fear, like I was, and I thought, well, I need to get a support group around me. I need people to help me walk through this. So I told some of my friends at the office, this is what my husband and I are thinking about. They'd have this deadpan look on their face as if to say, oh, yeah. And how do you think that's going to work? And maybe you should just take some unpaid leave and try it. They had no confidence in my own mother. I told my mother I thought she'd be so excited. She said, what did Paul think of this? My husband. I said, Mom, It was his idea. Really? No confidence. And there are going to be people that don't have confidence in you when you tell them that you're going to do things. You know what? You have to back away from that and say, they are speaking and they are behaving from their point of fear. The people that I work with that I told, well, they had become dependent on me, right? I was their leader. I was their cheerleader. And so they were like, ooh, what are we going to do if she's gone? And who among us wants to take that place? So they speak from their point of fear. My mother, she was like, you've never done that before, and my grandkids seem to be doing okay. I'm not sure that if you get involved, that's going to be a good thing. People tell me all the time, you have such incredible kids. I said, well, very early on, I think God looked down and went, oh my goodness, that looks like a train wreck unless I get involved. And so, but that's one of the things that I want to tell you is, I had fear on the one side that caused me to behave in ways that I wish I never had. I had fear on the other side, moving from that to something else. I mean, good night, nurse. I had fear coming and going, and I still deal with it. But now I look at it different. I know that God has a plan for my life. That's number one. I know that everybody who speaks to me has fear just like me. And when they talk to me, they are speaking from their point of fear. And they put themselves in my shoes and they can't see me saying, well, this is what I'm going to do. These are the people I'm going to talk to. These are the people I'm going to call. They were like, They all have fear of failure and fear of rejection too. So as you go on this journey of a new career, find the energy gainers in your life. Find somebody who's going to encourage you and be your cheerleader and be willing to ask tough questions and give them permission to hold you accountable. And if you don't have someone like that, you can send me an email and give me permission to encourage you and to ask you the questions that will move you forward. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, she's a life coach, so she's going to promote her life coaching. No, I'm not. You know what? We all have the ability to be good coaches. And let me just tell you the difference between a coach and a therapist or a coach and a counselor. Coaching is not about giving advice. And it's not about telling somebody what to do. It's about believing in the person, the client that you're dealing with, and believing that they have the answers, and being able to ask the right questions that they come up with the strategies that they can use to move themselves forward. As a coach, I walk alongside my clients. I encourage them, I hold them accountable in a way that motivates them to move forward. And you all have people in your life that can do that. If you don't, I'd be honored to do that. But sometimes it's somebody that you love that is your best coach. Before I wrap up, I'd like to open it up for some questions. If anybody has a question they'd like to ask or a situation that they'd like to bring up, or a fear that they'd like to admit to. Yes, sir.
I like their concepts. They're all great. But for a lot of us in this room who have gone through less than perfect scenarios, moving from there to optimism is not an easy task.
That's right.
Okay. So how would you, other than, working with people who are, going to give you positive energy, which I appreciate that. There's a lot more that I need to do from moving from where I am to where I want to be than necessarily working with somebody.
Right.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
Would you like me to repeat that kind of in general? Well, yeah. Let me take a shot at it, and then you fill in if I did. So the question was, many of the people in this room have gone through several negative things, or have had a series of negative things. And moving into a place of optimism is a very difficult thing to do. And I certainly didn't mean, if I made it sound like it was easy, forgive me, it's not. So, but the question is, how do we get there? How do we go from where we are into optimism? So, there are some things that take an act of will. Is that It is that simple and that difficult. It's an act of your will. It is to say, and it's a practice. My coaching practice is just that. It's a practice. You talk about things that you have to work on. You don't, become a bodybuilder by lifting weights once a week, right? It's something it's an act of your will that has to happen every day. You choose it. And I'm going to tell you right now that there are times in those 2 stories that I told you that I couldn't get there. It was a day, it was a couple days, it was a week. It was devastating. It was an emotionally devastating time for me. And I was so fearful that I was paralyzed. Okay, fear does that. Fear puts us in a place of pain, paralysis, and procrastination. Those are the 3 P's of fear. Willfully moving to optimism is what puts us in a place of optimistic thinking, a future of hope, and opportunities. We cannot get there without stepping into optimism. And it is willful. It is absolutely willful. Many of you are married in the room? Yes, no, don't want to be? Some, okay. So I'm gonna use a marriage example. I've been married 6 years last Monday. That's a long time. Many of you have been married longer. You do not always feel like you love that person. Okay? Love is a feeling, but it is also a willful decision. There are days where I have looked over first thing in the morning and thought, are you kidding me? And I have no doubt that he's done that and thought, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I have no doubt. But it is an act of my will that I choose to love my husband and show him respect. That is an act of my will. And I want to tell you something. This may sound trite, but sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. Sometimes I have to be optimistic and be energetic when I don't feel optimistic and I don't feel energetic, because I don't want to stay where I am. And the only way to move from where I am is to move out of that place and into a new place. I'm going to tell you just real quick. I worked with a client last week, and this particular client had a lot of feelings of anger and resentfulness towards a member of his family, actually, and his dad. And he said, I just can't get past that because of X, Y, Z, ABC, X, Y, Z, ABC. I said, okay, all those things are justified. And all your feelings are justified. But if we take that person or that situation, the negative situations we've been through, and we push them back, push the emotion back from them, step away from them, and look at them from a distance. And this is what I said to him. I said, if that person, his father in this case, if that person was the elderly gentleman down the street and was telling you the same story and behaving the same way, but he's the elderly gentleman down the street, how would you feel about him? And you know what he said? He said, well, I guess I'd feel empathy. I said, wow. Empathy is a long way from anger, my friends. He had to push back and look at it from a different perspective. And it was a willful change. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add a recipe for me to get into optimism from fear was faith.
Absolutely.
Like a blanket covering a small fire. I mean, without faith, with faith, you can get over your fear like that and it'll turn that into optimism. So
That's right, absolutely. And you know, I read something recently that I thought was great about that. We trust people. Sometimes we trust people. And what happens? We get disappointed. God never asked us to trust people. He said, love people and trust me. Love people and trust me. Not trust people and love me. We have to love people, understand the human condition. They're all speaking from their pain point. So love people and trust God. You're absolutely right. And I will tell you that during some of my toughest times, I was a believer. I was always a believer during that time. But, you know, I backed myself into a corner, right? And I was standing there not willing to walk forward. And I knew where God wanted me to go. So I started to have a debate with him about why I shouldn't go there and I was the wrong person and he needed to pick somebody else. I don't know if you've ever had those kind of debates. I was telling my son about it one time. I was like, well, God and I are debating that. He goes, Mom, have you ever won one of those? And I haven't. But you know what? My problem was I was standing back there with my back into a corner and I thought, I'm going to step out and I'm going to be out there all by myself. And then I thought, well, that's silly. He's not going to take me anywhere. He's not going to stand with me, right? So I'm going to have to trust. That didn't totally resolve my fear. Craig mentioned that, I only have 2 minutes. Craig mentioned that I serve at a crisis pregnancy center, and I was asked for several years to be a counselor there, and I said absolutely not, because the thought of what I was going to hear in those counselors' rooms scared me to death. I said no, no, and no. I knew that God wanted me in there, and so I tried to negotiate with him. I said, I'll write him a check. And I did. And he said, that's great, you need to be in the counseling room. I'll write a bigger check. No, that's great. You need to be in the counseling room. Finally, I went into the counseling room and I told him, I said, okay, God, I'm going to do this, but I'm not telling my story. Just want to make sure that you understand that, I'm doing this because you want me to do it, but I'm not going to tell my story. So I'm glad we have that understanding. Well, not too long after that, I got a little tap on my shoulder by the Holy Spirit, and I was in that room, and he was like, hey, now's a good time to tell your story. Because I was with somebody that walked like me, talked like me, had the same issue I did. And I said, no, remember, we made that deal? And I said that I would be here, but I wouldn't tell my story. And he said, well, I don't know who you made that deal with, but if you recall, you did all the talking. So I was scared to death, and I was still scared to death. And I didn't know how it was going to end up, but when we take that willful first step of faith, and we are one step off our front porch, we can look back and see the distance that we've come. Yes, ma'am.
I have like a really good person that I know believes in me, but every now and then, her place of fear kind of affects me when I'm in the middle of my place of fear.
Right.
Is there any tips or tricks that you have to kind of just immediately shut that down where, like I can take a step back later on and get over it and stuff.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it just kind of winds me up more.
Absolutely. And here it is. Whenever you get to that place, it's always a question. It's always a question. When you want to get out of a spot, and think of this, Jesus, when people ask Jesus questions, what did he do the majority of the time? He asked them a question back. So you ask a question. What would we believe if this wasn't true? That's one question. Where would I be if I didn't believe what I'm believing right now? What other option is there than what we're thinking is real right now? Is our only option. If I didn't believe this, what would I believe? And come up with a list. Yes, sir.
What about the fear causing positive action? I.e., in the context of godly fear, or I'm working my tail off because of some prior thing that happened in the past, and that motivates me. That fear is motivating me to do something. I know you talked about fear that caused action, but I wasn't
if Dr. Susan Jeffers talks about godly fear, no, in her first book, actually, I'm not sure she was even a believer. In her second book, she became a believer prior to passing away. So most of my understanding of godly fear, the fear of the Lord in the Bible, is a reverence. The fear that we're taught, so being, the beginning of all wisdom, is fear. That's more of a reverence, and probably Craig can talk to you more about that.
I brought my postcards with scriptures. They're front and back so that y'all could photo them with your smartphones, for those of you who have smartphones. Read them every night before. My handwriting's atrocious, so you're going to have to do your own, but this will give you enough to legibility. But read them every night before bed, every morning when you get up. When you're having panic attacks or fear, you got to read the scriptures over and over until they become one with your soul. Not that I'm there either. I'm like you. I'm walking through it too. But substitute the scriptures when it says you to me or I. And I put the Hebrew Yahweh, if you're comfortable with Jehovah. When it says God or Lord, say his name, whichever, whether you want it in the English or the Hebrew. Mm-hmm. But y'all are welcome to come take copies front and back on the postcards.
Thank you.
And my handwriting is horrible.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm about 3 minutes over, but anybody else? And let me say something about that. Remember the wiring, okay? We are wired this way. So you're not weird, you're not wrong, you're not wired wrong, you are wired this way. God did this on purpose. He didn't make a mistake. Okay? What we're doing is we're taking the fear that we don't need to save our life, and we're changing it and reviewing it through the filter of hope so that we can create, right? When you're forward looking in that hope, we can create a future where we can live our life purpose on purpose. Thank you very much for coming today. I've really enjoyed it, and I'll be in the back of the room for any questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.